Hey there, sleepy adventurers. Welcome back to another cozy night of stories that'll lull you into dreamland before we dive headfirst into tonight's wild ride. If you're already feeling like that warm, fuzzy feeling from my stories, I'd be over the moon if you could just hit that like button and subscribe. Laugh. No pressure though, laugh just so only if my tales truly strike a chord with you. Now I'm super curious. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I love imagining all of us scattered across the globe, sharing these peaceful moments together. Now it's time to set the mood. Dim those lights until the whole room is bathed in a soft, gentle glow, and turn on that trusty little fan to create the perfect white noise like backdrop. Let the outside world fade away and get ready to journey back in time with me tonight. We're hopping into the driver's seat of history and taking a high-octane ride through the life of one of the most iconic tank commanders ever, George S. Patton. Buckle up, or should I just say snuggle up, laugh, because this is one story you probably won't want to miss as we explore Patton's tank blitz moments. Hey there, sleepyheads. Let's kick off our wild ride through the life of George S. Patton with his early days. You know, Patton wasn't just born a battle-hardened general with a fleet of tanks at his command. He started as just another kid with a really laugh in really tense hobby. Little like George was absolutely obsessed with tanks long before they even became a thing in the military. While other boys were playing with toy swords and cowboy hats, Patton had his hands just all over these miniature metal beasts. His room, laugh, it was basically just a toy tank museum. There were tanks of all shapes and sizes, lined up on shelves, scattered across the floor, you name it. He would just spend hours arranging them, imagining epic battles between his tiny armored forces. His family must have thought he was a bit nuts. I mean, can you picture it? Laugh, the Patton family sitting down for dinner, and little George is in the corner making sex like vroom, vroom, running like sounds with his toy tanks, ignoring his mashed potato. His mother would probably sigh and say, "Daily, George, dear, can you please focus on your food?" Dean laughed. But no, George was off in his own world, so strategizing just how his toy tanks would outmaneuver the imaginary enemy. As he grew older, this obsession just didn't fade. Instead, it just got more. Intense. He started reading every book so he could get his hands on about military history, warfare tactics, and anything related to armored vehicles. Even when he was supposed to be studying for school exams, you'd find him hidden away, poring over tomes about the future of warfare. Laugh. His teachers had a hard time with him. They saw this brilliant but distracted student who seemed more interested in tanks than in Latin grammar or algebra. But Patton didn't care. He just knew what he wanted, and that was to be really at the forefront of this new and exciting form of warfare. Little did he know that these childhood obsessions would lay the foundation for his future as one of the most iconic tank commanders in history. His early days with toy tanks taught him just the importance of strategy, positioning, and the sheer power of armored forces. And as always, we'll soon see those lessons would serve him well on the real battlefields. So as you start to drift off, just imagine a young George Patton surrounded by his toy tanks, just dreaming big dreams that would one day shake the world. All right, so now that we know how Patton's tank obsession started, let's fast forward to his time at the military academy. You'd think being in a place full of future soldiers would be a dream come true for him, right? Laugh. Well, not exactly. It was more like a constant battle between his tank-loving heart and the traditional military rules. When Patton first stepped onto the academy grounds, he was full of energy and enthusiasm, but as soon as he realized that the focus was more on horseback riding and swordplay, you know, the old school military stuff, he just started to rebel. The academy had these strict training regimens, and most of them didn't involve anything remotely related to tanks. One day during a routine drill, instead of paying attention to the cavalry maneuvers, Patton was caught sketching tank designs in the dirt. His instructor was not amused. "So Brayton, what in the world are you doing? This is a cavalry academy, not a workshop for your crazy metal contraptions." Twice the instructor barked, but Patton, being the stubborn guy he was, just looked up and said, "Go on, sir. Laugh, just with all due respect. These cavalry tactics are going to be obsolete once tanks hit the battlefield." That comment earned him a week of extra drills and a stern lecture. But Patton didn't give up. He would sneak into the library at night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, and study the latest theories on armored warfare. He even started a little TIS underground area, jol with a few like-minded cadets, where they would discuss and debate the future of tanks in military strategy. Laugh, of course, when the academy authorities found out, they shut it down immediately. During the academy's regular sand table war games, Patton became the talk of the town. Laugh, he would always come up with these unorthodox strategies that involved imaginary tank units. Once he daily deployed notes I weak tanks daily in a way that completely surrounded the opposing forces, winning the mock battle in record time. His fellow cadets were in awe, but the instructors were so furious. They saw his tactics as a violation of the traditional rules of engagement. Despite all the pushback, Patton refused to conform. He knew that the future of warfare was on tracks, not on horseback. And even though he got into a lot of trouble during his time at the academy, those rebellious acts were just the beginning of his long fight to bring tanks to the forefront of military strategy. As you start to feel those sleepy vibes, just think of young Patton, defying the odds and sticking to his tank-filled dreams in the heart of a traditional military institution. To the academy, right? And guess what? He gets assigned to the cavalry. Laugh, like full on horseback riding, sword carrying cavalry. Most guys would be stoked. So I'm told this is the elite stuff, the glamorous part of the military. But not our boy George. Laugh. So he's standing there in his shiny cavalry uniform, looking at all these beautiful horses, and he's probably thinking, seriously, when do the tanks get here? But here's the thing. Patton was a proud cavalryman. Wait, hold on. That sounds like a contradiction. Let me explain. He loved the tradition, laugh, the discipline, the honor of the whole cavalry. He was like a master swordsman, rode like a pro, and respected the hell out of those horses. Laugh, but at the same time, he had this little voice in his head going, "Seeing tanks, tanks, tanks." It's like being in a relationship with someone you love, but constantly checking your phone for a better match. He started sneaking around military bases, pestering mechanics about these new daily tracked vehicles that were popping up. Imagine a cavalry officer in full regalia, polished boots, and all hanging out in a greasy workshop, asking questions like, "So this thing has tracks instead of legs, how fast can it go over mud? Can it shoot while moving? Do you think we can put a bigger gun on it?" Laughs of Bill. The mechanics probably thought he was nuts, but Patton was dead pretty serious. One time, he wrote a letter to his superiors proposing that the cavalry start training with the Scenic armored contraptions daily. He even attached sketches of what he thought a tank should look like. Laugh, incomplete with little flags and bayonets because, cavalry traditions die hard. So the response of politeless thanks, but no thanks, stick to your horses, kid. But Patton didn't quit. He'd go on cavalry patrols and secretly scout terrain, thinking, "See, guess this valley would be perfect for a tank charge. That hill, laugh, tanks could just take that in no time." He even tried to convince his fellow cavalrymen that tanks were the future. Download just laugh. Imagine daily he'd say, clapping a guy on the shoulder. Star, instead of worrying about your horse getting shot, you're just inside a metal box, blasting the enemy to smithereens. Running, most of them just laughed and offered him a swig of whiskey. There's a story about him attending a fancy military ball. All the officers are in their dress uniforms, dancing with debutantes, and where's Patton? He's in a corner, so deep in conversation with a civilian engineer who'd worked on early tank prototypes. They're probably drawing tank designs on cocktail napkins while everyone else is doing the waltz. Laugh, talk about a party like Pooper, but also a visionary. His fellow cavalrymen started calling him Tatch Tin Man. Says some thought he was just betraying the cavalry's legacy, but Patton saw it differently. Laugh, sort of like Unk, he thought he was preserving the spirit of the cavalry, just in a more badass metal-clad form. He was like a cowboy in the age of airplanes, refusing to put away his lasso, but also eyeing the nearest fighter jet. So as you drift off, picture this, a dashing cavalry officer on a majestic horse, but in his mind, he's already behind the wheel of a thundering tank, Laugh, charging into the future. The whole clash between tradition and innovation, all wrapped up in one stubborn tank. Just obsessed, dude. Alright, let's get to one of the wildest chapters in Patton's tank obsessed journey. The desert. Laugh, just like Shi Jinghuan. By this point, Patton's managed to weasel his way into some early tank development projects. And what better place to test these newfangled machines than the vast, unforgiving deserts? Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly go as planned. Patton, the eager beaver, showed up at the test site like a kid on Christmas morning. The sun was blazing, the sand was scorching, and there were these shiny, like brand new tanks waiting to be put through their paces. Patton hopped into one of the tanks without a second thought, ignoring the warnings from the engineers about potential mechanical glitches. Respa. These things are built like tanks daily, like he probably exclaimed, not realizing the whole irony of his statement. As soon as the tank rumbled to life, Patton hit the gas and took off. He was zipping across the desert, feeling like the king of the world. The tank's tracks were kicking up sand like nobody's business, and Patton was like grinning from ear to ear inside that metal box. Laugh. But then things started to go south, way south. The tank hit a patch of soft sand, and suddenly it was like trying to drive through quicksand. The track started spinning, but the tank wasn't going anywhere. Patton, not one to give up easily, so tried to reverse, then go forward again, but it was no use. The tank was stuck, and to make matters worse, the engine started just overheating. Inside the tank, it was like an oven. Patton was sweating buckets, and the air was getting thinner by the minute. Panic started to set in, but instead of freaking out, he did the most Patton thing ever, so he started singing army songs at the top of his lungs. I can just picture him, just red-faced and covered in sweat, belting out, holds the whole casino song shoot, exchange out the whole tank, slowly cooked him alive. Outside, the engineers were running around like headless chickens, trying to figure out how to rescue their crazy general. They tried hooking up ropes using other tanks to pull, but the sand was just too stubborn. Laugh. Meanwhile, Patton was still inside, still singing and probably thinking up ways to improve the tank's sand, just like driving capabilities. After what felt like hours, but was probably just a few dozen minutes, they finally managed to free the tank. Patton emerged from the metal beast, looking like a hot mess, but still with a determined glint in his eye. Tony, like this, was a valuable test, phone, he declared, as if getting stuck in the desert was probably part of the plan all along. That crazy desert adventure taught Patton a lot about the limitations and capabilities of tanks, and instead of being discouraged, it just fueled his obsession even more. So as you start to feel those sleepy waves wash over you, just think of Patton stuck in the desert, singing his heart out and dreaming up ways to make his beloved tanks even more unstoppable. All right, so Patton's deep into his tank obsession, but here's the problem. Laugh. So he needs people who can actually build the whole damn things. Enter Histis Patton-style recruitment full unki, which basically means recruiting like a drunk carnival barker on a mission. Picture This Patton striding into a crowded bar near an army base, whiskey in one hand, tank blueprint in the other, ready to charm engineers into just joining his mad quest. First stop, the local engineering college. Instead of giving a boring lecture, Peyton shows up in full uniform, metals clinking, and just starts his pitch with a bang. Boy, listen up, eggheads, you like it booms daily. You want to design bridges that don't fall down, or do you want to build metal monsters that'll make the enemy soil their pants? Like you, confused stares from professors, but a few wide-eyed students start leaning forward. He did whip out sketches of tanks with flamethrowers and machine guns, talking so fast his mustache twitched to dim. This is a T, just like engineering, like just uncut. Next, he hit up factory floors. Imagine a group of mechanics welding pipes, and suddenly Patton marches in, helmet on backwards, shouting daily, "Who here can make a track that one, snap like a twig in mud, star?" He grab a guy's side wrench, start gesturing wildly, and promise the Dada, "Join me and you will be famous." Laugh so your grandkids will brag that grandpa built the tanks that crushed Hitler's ego daily. Half the workers thought he was just so nuts, but the ones with a taste for adventure started nodding. Their Pisser legend about him recruiting a shy mathematician. The guy was buried in equations, and Patton slammed his blueprint on the desk. "Shinson, your formulas are just making my eyes bleed. But if you can calculate how to make a tank climb a 45-degree slope, I'll buy you a case of the finest whiskey like this base has to offer." Chung, the mathematician, too stunned to argue, ended up drafting equations on a napkin while Peyton cheered. Just him on. Even officers weren't safe. He'd corner a board captain at mess hall daily. Like, "Hey, you were good at paperwork, right? Well, forget that." Laugh. "So uncome be my tank logistics wizard. I need someone to figure out how to get 1,000 tanks from here to there without them breaking down. Like my first marriage." Download the captain, probably sick of filing reports, eventually caved. Patton's secret sauce. He made working on tanks feel like joining a rebel army, not a boring military project. He'd slap recruits on the back, call them cook geniuses, laugh, kick even if they messed up, and throw wild brainstorming sessions where everyone just yelled ideas over each other. Once during a late night meeting, he ordered pizza and told the team, "Kick if we can, to figure out this transmission problem. I am making you all ride horses into battle, and I'll be laughing from my whole tank." Sure, half the people he recruited were probably in it for the adventure or the free booze, but Patton didn't care. He knew that behind every crazy idea, just there, says a crazy team just needed to make it happen. So as you drift off, imagine Patton in a smoky bar, glass raised, yelling, "Download to tanks," and the lunatics who build them laugh sort of like uncut, and a bunch of bleary-eyed engineers cheering him on. All right. Let's talk about the time Patton decided that tanks needed a little personality, because who says war machines can look cool while blowing things up? Laugh. Enter the tank graffiti incident, a wild ride that drove his superiors up the wall and turned his armored fleet into a rolling art exhibit. Picture this: Patton's tank division is prepping for a major operation. Mechanics are tightening bolts, soldiers are loading ammunition, and Patton is strutting around just like a peacock on a mission. He stops in front of a shiny new tank, eyes narrowing. "This thing looks like a tin can." He mutters, "Laugh, where's the intimidation factor?" Yeah, and just like that, he gets an idea that sets equal parts so brilliant and bonkers. He calls in a young private who's known for doodling in his spare time. Son Patton says, clapping him on the shoulder so hard the poor guy stumbles, like, "Oh, I just want you to paint a skull and crossbones on every single tank in this division. Big, mean, and ugly enough to make the Germans wet themselves." The private's eyes go wide. Sir One top the brass laugh laugh Anka. "Yeah, the brass can stuff it." Patton barks, "I want these tanks to look like they straight out of the Devil's Garage." Word spreads like wildfire. Some soldiers think it's a genius. Others worry they would get court-martialed for defacing government property. But Patton sat, not backing down. He even joins in, grabbing the paintbrush and sloppily adding fangs to one of the skulls. See, yeah, he shouts, paint splattered on his uniform. Now that laugh. Sai tank, that means business. Sure enough, when the reports reach headquarters, the generals lose their minds. What is Patton thinking? This is a military operation, not a circus one. Yells, waving like a report, covered in photos of the graffiti-clad tanks. But here, said the kicker, laugh when the division rolls out, something really unexpected happens. The soldiers manning those tanks feel so invincible. They're not just operating machines. They like re-riding into battle on the backs of metal beasts with snarling faces. Morale skyrockets, and the enemy, well, let's just say, those skull-painted tanks make for one hell of a psychological weapon. Laugh, German troops start whispering about like the American Death Fleet, and some even claim the tanks' painted eye seemed to just follow them.
Patton says superiors might have fumed, but the results spoke for themselves. When asked to explain, Patton just shrugged and said, "Oh, yeah, a soldier fights better when his tank looks as mean as he feels."
And so, the tank graffiti stayed becoming a trademark of Patton's forces, like laugh, sort of like uncam, and a headache for anyone trying to keep the military looking professional. As you start to doze off, picture those skull-faced tanks rumbling across the battlefield, scaring the daylights out of everyone in their path.
Okay, buckle up for the drill fiasco that had everyone from soldiers to generals scratching their heads. Picture this: Patton, set in charge of a major military exercise, and instead of sticking to the boring old script, he decides to throw a curveball that would make even a baseball pro jealous. The exercise is supposed to simulate a standard defense versus offense scenario, but Patton, being Patton, has other plans. He gathers his troops and grins like a kid about to pull off the world's biggest prank. "Listen up," he shouts. "We were not just going through the motions today. I just want you to treat this like the real deal." Laugh. Just no, scratch that. The craziest, most insane battle you've ever imagined. The problem, he forgets to tell the other side of the exercise. Laugh. Unca's supposed allies, Unkai that he swing off. So when the day of the drill arrives and Patton's tanks start barreling towards the friendly base at full speed, sirens start blaring. The soldiers on the defensive side are in a panic. What the hell, are we under attack? Literally, they shout, scrambling to man their defenses. Patton, meanwhile, is in his element. He's riding in the lead tank, waving his arms and barking orders like a madman. "Faster, faster. I want those tanks to hit that base like a sledgehammer." He yells. His troops, caught up in his sort of infectious enthusiasm, are whooping and hollering as they charge forward. Back at the friendly base, chaos ensues. The commanders are trying to radio Patton, demanding to know what's going on. But Patton sees at radio operators following his orders just smile and ignore the calls. "Sir," says, "we were not listening to distractions." One operator says, just as the panicked voices just crackle over the airwaves. The situation gets even worse when Patton's set tanks start using blanks to attack the base. The sound of gunfire and the sight of smoke rising sends the defenders into a full-blown frenzy. They start firing back, thinking they're in a real battle, and just like when things can't get any more insane, Patton decides to add a little extra flair. He orders his troops to set off smoke bombs, creating a thick billowing cloud that completely obscures the whole battlefield. By the time the exercise finally ends, the friendly base looks like it just it's been through a war zone. Tents are knocked over. Equipment is scattered everywhere, and the soldiers are exhausted and confused. The generals, who've been watching the whole debacle from a safe distance, are apoplectic. "Patton, what in the name of all that's so holy were you thinking?" "Yeah," one general roars, waving his fist. But Patton, unruffled as ever, just smirks. "I was thinking." So he says, "Yeah, that if we're going to train for war." We might as well train for a war that actually feels real. And while he might have gotten a stern lecture, deep down everyone knew that his crazy chaotic exercise had taught them more about real-world combat than any number of by-the-whole-book drills ever could. As you drift off, imagine the chaos of that day, with tanks roaring, soldiers like shouting, and Patton Sat's wild laughter just echoing across the battlefield.
If you thought Patton's love for tanks was so intense, wait till you hear about his soldier's nightmare training regime. Spoiler alert, it's not for the faint-hearted or anyone who values sleep, sanity, laugh, or their leg muscle. Picture a group of fresh-faced recruits nervously awaiting their first day of training. They've heard stories about Patton, but nothing could prepare them for what's just about to hit. Listen up, maggots, Patton bellows, pacing in front of the group like a caged lion. You think you're soldiers, you're just like a bunch of soft-bellied civilians with uniforms, but like Tante worry laugh. Uncut, I am gonna turn you into tank driving, like killing machines if it kills you. And with that, the torture, training begins. First up, the whole track lifting challenge. Patton orders the recruits to lift heavy tank tracks over their heads and carry them around the training ground. If you can lift this, how are you gonna fix a tank in the middle of a battlefield? Laugh. Anyway, he shouts as soldiers struggle and grunt under the weight. Some guys are sweating so much, so they were practically swimming in their own perspiration. But the real kicker is like the tank-inspired calisthenics instead of regular push-ups. Patton makes them do tank turret rotations where they twist their upper bodies as if they were aiming a machine gun. Sit-ups become ammunition, loading drills, and running laps turns into chasing the tank exercises. One poor recruit, already exhausted, trips and falls while trying to keep up with a slow-moving tank. Patton marches over, bends down, and growls just like get up soldier in a real battle. The enemy won. Wait for you to catch your breath. And let's not forget the midnight surprise drills. Just when the soldiers finally manage to doze off, the sound of tank engines roaring wakes them up. They reforced to jump out of bed, scramble into their uniforms, and race to their assigned tanks. Laugh, unquote, while Patton's voice booms over the loudspeaker. Yeah, this is what it's like when the enemy attacks at dawn. Move, move. The soldiers start to dread every moment of training. They constantly sore, sleep deprived, and half convinced that Patton has a personal vendetta against comfort. But here, Seth, the strange thing is the weeks go by, something starts to change. The recruits who once could barely lift a rifle are now hauling heavy equipment with ease. Their reflexes are lightning so fast, and they were starting to think like true tank commanders. One soldier, grumbling during a water break, says, "Oh, I hate this guy, but I think he's actually making me a better soldier." And that's exactly what Patton wanted. His brutal training wasn't about torture. It was just about pushing his men to their limits, because he knew that on the real battlefield, the only thing that would keep them alive was being stronger, faster, and tougher than the whole enemy. So as you start to drift off, spare a thought for those poor soldiers dreaming of soft beds and easy days, but secretly becoming the most formidable tank crew in the army. All right, let's shift gears and head to the scorching deserts of North Africa, where Patton set about to kick off his legendary tank adventures. But before the North African Blitz could begin, there was a whole lot of chaos and confusion behind the scenes. Let's call it the prelude to the North African Blitz. When Patton first landed in North Africa, he was like a kid in a candy store, except the candy was enemy territory to conquer. But here's the problem. The situation on the ground was just a hot mess. Allied forces were scattered, supplies were scarce, and morale was lower than a snake's belly. Patton took one look around and thought, oh, well, this one, through time to shake things up. His first move, getting lost. Laugh. Oh yes, you read that right, Patton. The supposed master of military strategy decided to take a scouting trip across the desert with his team. He figured, oh, how hard can it be? Just follow the sun and the sand, right? Oh, wrong, left. Within hours, they were just completely turned around. The desert all looked the same, and their maps were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. As the hours dragged on, supplies started running low. They were down to the last of their water, and the only food left was some stale, like rock-hard army ration. Patton, ever the optimist, cracked a joke. Oh, well, boys, at least these biscuits will give our teeth a good workout, but deep down he was worried. They needed to find their way back, and really fast. While they were lost, Patton didn't just sit around twiddling his thumbs. He just used the time to brainstorm new tactics. With a stick in the sand, he drew out plans for how to use his tanks to outmaneuver like the enemy. We'll hit them from the flanks like a whole pack of wolves, he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. The soldiers, tired and hungry as they were, just couldn't help but get caught up in his enthusiasm. Finally, after 3 long days of wandering, they stumbled upon a friendly outpost. The soldiers at the outpost were shocked to see them. Laugh, General, we thought you were dead, one exclaimed. Patton just laughed and said, oh, dead me? I've got too many tanks to drive and too many Germans to beat just for that. That crazy lost in like the whole like desert experience actually ended up being a blessing in disguise. It gave Patton a chance to think outside the box, and the tactics he came up with during those 3 days would later become the foundation for his successful campaigns in North Africa. So as you start to doze off, imagine Patton lost in the vast desert, munching on stale biscuits and dreaming up ways to unleash his tanks on the enemy. Now let's just dive into the heart-pounding desert death race, where Patton and his arch rival Rommel turned the North African desert into the world's most dangerous racetrack. Picture this: 2 military geniuses, both obsessed with speed and strategy, facing off in a high-stakes game of who can reach the objective first. And oh boy, did it get so intense. Patton knew that Rommel, like the desert fox, was no joke, but instead of cowering in fear, he saw it as a personal challenge. We were not just fighting the Germans. He told his troops, we raced in a race with that fox, and I'm not about to let him win. So with that, he ordered his tank crews to push their machines to the absolute limit. The desert terrain was no joke. It was a treacherous mix of soft sand, hidden dunes, and rocky patches. One wrong move, and a tank could get stuck or tip over. But Patton did so take care. Full speed ahead, he'd yell as his tank careened over the desert landscape, kicking up a massive cloud of dust behind it. His soldiers, white-knuckled and holding on for dear life, could only really hope the tanks would just fall apart. Rommel, on the other hand, was playing his own game. He was known for his unpredictable maneuvers, and he wasn't about to let Patton steal the show. So the 2 commanders were like 2 gladiators, sizing each other up from afar, waiting for the perfect moment to really strike. One day, word reached Patton that Rommel was heading towards a strategic hill. Without hesitation, Patton barked out the order. We were going to beat him to that hill, even if it kills us. And so, yeah, the race was on. Patton's sent tanks roared across the desert, their engines screaming. The soldiers could just feel the heat from the engines, and the sand was flying everywhere. As they got closer to the hill, they could see Rommel's scythe forces in the distance. It was like a neck and neck race. Patton, in a fit of madness, climbed out of his tank hatch and stood on top, waving his arms and urging his men on. Faster, faster, he shouted, ignoring the very real risk of getting shot or thrown off. In the end, it was a photo finish. Patton's forces reached the hill just minutes before Rommel cessed. The soldiers cheered, exhausted but elated. Patton, grinning from ear to ear, looked out at the defeated German forces and said, oh, round 1 goes to us, boys, but the war's not just over yet. That, like, desert death race wasn't just about capturing a hill. It was a statement. Patton had shown Rommel and the world that he wasn't afraid to take risks, so that he was willing to push his men and his machines to the brink to achieve victory. And as you drift off to sleep, just imagine the thunderous roar of those tanks, the clouds of dust, and the fierce determination of two really great commanders locked in a high-stakes battle across the desert sand. All right, let's talk about a side of Patton that might surprise you. Laugh like Unc, the guy who wrote love letters from the battlefield while his tanks rumbled in the background. Welcome total romance under the tracks daily, where Patton proved that even a tough-ass nails like General has a soft spot for his wife Bea and a knack for turning military jargon into, well, something that resembles romance. Picture like this. Patton is sitting in the cramped command post of his tank, the engine vibrating beneath him, gunfire echoing in the distance. Instead of poring over maps, he's just like scribbling furiously on a pad of paper, his mustache laugh twitching as he tries to find the right words. Laugh so life doth be the key. He starts, guy, today I led a column of tanks across a desolate plain, and all I could think was how much more beautiful it would be if you were here. Like Uncle, maybe not in a tank as the suspension is absolute rubbish. These weren't just your typical sappy love letters. Laugh Patton had a way of blending battlefield updates with really heartfelt affection, often in the most unexpected ways. Inc. We took a hill today. When? He wrote in one letter. Lost the tanks perform so splendidly, much like how you always manage to make our home run smoothly, even when I'm off being all tin can. Laugh General. 'Cause speaking of tin cans, I wish this one had a compartment for your homemade cookies. But the real gold was when he tried to use military metaphors to express his feelings. Daily, my love for you is like a well-maintained tank engine. Like he just penned in another letter. He sees smoothly, even in the roughest terrain, and every time I think it can't get stronger, it proves me wrong. Laugh like sort of like uncut, much like how you always manage to surprise me with your resilience. Soldiers caught glimpses of this side of Patton when they delivered messages to his command post. They'd see him hunched over his desk like a rare softness in his eyes as he wrote. Just laugh, completely oblivious to the chaos around him. One young private tasked with delivering a cup of coffee accidentally knocked over a stack of letters. When he bent to pick them up, he saw phrases like, "Was missing your smile, more than my favorite whiskey living when," says, "the desert sand reminds me of the way your hair catches the whole sunlight." Area, the private sort of nearly dropped the coffee again in shock. Even Patton's typist got a kick out of his letters. They'd exchange amused glances as they transcribed lines like, "Oh, twint laugh. I dream of the day when I can trade this tank for a rocking chair, though I must admit, maybe the chair won't have nearly as much firepower." Via once, a typist accidentally left a letter on a desk, and it quickly became the talk of the camp. Laugh. So, sort of like uncold soldiers were amazed that the man who yelled at them for dirty uniforms could write such tender words. Laugh. But here's the thing. Those letters weren't just about love. They were Patton's way of staying grounded, of reminding himself that there was a whole world beyond the battlefield. And when Bea wrote back, often sending care packages with socks and chocolate, Patton would carry her letters in his pocket, tapping them against his tank's dashboard like a good, laugh charm. So as you drift off, imagine Patton surrounded by the noise and dirt of war, taking a quiet moment to pour his heart out on paper laugh, like on proof that even the toughest tank commanders have a soft center buried somewhere under all that armor. Now let's dive into one of Patton's most head-scratching moves, the armored torrent paradox. Hold picture this. Patton's got 1,000 tanks ready to roll, so a radio system meant to coordinate them, and then he orders most of the radios torn out. Yeah, you read that, right? That's so, because he basically said, Nick, screw modern communication. Let's do this like cavemen with battle cries. Tin. The logic, well, Patton had this wild idea that radios were for cowards. Guy, if you rely on radios, the enemy can intercept your orders. Ling Yi laughed, so he barked at his confused officer. Laugh, so Lima, I want my tank commanders to think on their feet, not just wait for some radio operator to tell them what to do. Gong, never mind that radios were kind of a big deal in modern warfare. Like Patton was convinced that true leadership meant yelling orders while charging into battle. So began the Great Radio Ripping campaign. Mechanics wandered from tank to tank, wrenching out radios like they were pulling teeth. Soldiers watched, half just convinced their general had finally lost it. Of course, sir. How are we supposed to coordinate if we can't talk to each other? Guy laugh. One brave soul asked Patton, fixed him with a steely glare. Twice you'll coordinate by seeing where my tank is going and following it, just like a pack of wolves. Just like sort of like hunt, no need for chit-chat when the leader is charging. The first test came during a training exercise. Patton's tank took off, followed by a few eager commanders. But then a sandstorm rolled in. Visibility dropped to 0. Laugh, and so chaos erupted. Tanks wandered off in different directions, commanders shouting themselves hoarse, trying to be heard over the engine noise. One tank ended up chasing a herd of goats, mistaking them for enemy scouts. Another almost drove into a river, saved only by just a private who jumped out and waved his shirt like a madman. Back at headquarters, generals listened to the radio chatter. Ironically, Patton kept his own radio and heard nothing but garbled yelling and the occasional ding, like, oh crap, we're stuck again. Fung laugh. One general turned to another and said, Daily, is he trying to recreate the Dark Ages, or is this some sort of brilliant strategy we're just too dumb to understand? But here's the twist, laugh. When the real battle started, something weird happened. So without radios, tank commanders had to make split-second decisions, just like Patton wanted. They learned to read the battlefield, anticipate moves, and act like independently. During one key engagement, a battalion cut off from orders saw an opening and charged, turning the tide of the battle. Laugh, like literally, like something they never would have done if they were waiting for a radio command. Patton, of course, took all the credit. Geisy. Yeah, Liu Tat told his skeptical superiors, Gears, no radios mean no hesitation. My tanks are like a swarm of angry bees. Laugh. So Onke, you can't predict where they'll strike next. Star. And while the brass never fully bought into his logic, they couldn't argue with the results. Patton Slack's radio, free in tactics, became legendary, even if half the soldiers thought their general was just a few tracks short of a tank. So as you drift off, imagine a vast desert landscape filled with roaring tanks. Laugh, Unka, like none of which can talk to each other. Unka following one man in a jeep, waving his cane and shouting orders like it's 1917. Logic be damned sometimes. Chaos is probably the best strategy. Alright, hold on to your helmets for daily champagne tactics, daily laugh. So Unka, the time Patton decided that booze was the secret weapon no one saw coming. So picture this, it's the night before a big offensive. Soldiers are tense and Patton rolls up in a jeep trailer full of champagne bottles, clanking behind him. Daily, tonight we drink like kings. Daily, he like booms. Daily, tomorrow we'll fight like demons, but first, like let's get tipsy. The idea started when Patton noticed his troops were too wound up. Daily, nerves are tighter than a tank's tracks. Laugh. Daily, like he grumbled to his aide. Like they need to relax or they'll freeze up on the battlefield. Egoted of the usual pep talk, he ordered crates of champagne delivered to every unit daily. This isn't just booze, Ying-yi, he told confused lieutenants. Download its liquid courage. The French used to give their soldiers wine before like battle. Laugh, like sort of like Unkwa were upgrading to bubbly. The scene was surreal in foxholes and tank crews, tough as like nails. Soldiers were popping champagne corks like it was New Year's Eve. Laugh, some were skeptical at first. Scene is this? So aloud a daily, one private asked, holding a glass. Patton clapped him on the back so hard, and champagne sloshed over, foam ingly, laugh, ordering it, drink up, son, unca. Nothing boosts morale like a little fizz in your vein. But Patton didn't stop at just drinking. Laugh, he turned it into a full-blown event. In one division, he hosted Axe Champagne Toast You, where he stood on a tank, glass in hand, and yelled daily to victory, to tanks, and to making the Germans really wish they'd stayed home and planted potatoes. The soldiers cheered, sloshing champagne everywhere, like their earlier nerves replaced by boisterous energy. The real magic happened the next day. As the tanks rolled out, soldiers were still grinning from the night before, just joking about who had the worst champagne hangover. One sergeant who'd been shaking with anxiety just the day before was singing loudly in his tank. "Daily, I told you," Daily, Patton said to his aide watching from his command vehicle. "Ning ila tulkoi goes laugh a really long way in battle." Daily, even the enemy got wind of it. German propaganda later mocked Daily the drunk American army, Daily, but the joke was on them. Patton's troops attacked with a ferocity that caught the Germans off guard, so laugh, sort of like just they'd expected hangovers, not a buzz of confidence. One captured German officer admitted Daily, "We thought they'd be too hungover to fight, but they came at us like they'd been drinking rocket fuel." Patton's superiors were less amused when they heard about the champagne splurge. "Twice do you realize how much that cost?" "Oh," when one general barked. Patton just shrugged. Futon just shrugging. Futon just laughed. "Our men were too scared to move. Consider it an investment in victory." Daily, and when the mission succeeded, the brass couldn't argue, laugh. So basically, though they did make sure Futronic morale boosters, Unio, were a bit cheaper than champagne. So as you drift off, imagine rows of tanks under the starlight, soldiers clinking glasses of champagne, laughing and joking, ready to face the next day's battle with a little buzz and a lot more courage. Patton might have been crazy, but sometimes just crazy laugh just works. Get ready for the wildest hygiene routine in military history. Full Nyber laugh tank scene, daily picture like this. Patton's tank division has been slogging through mud and dust for weeks, so their machines caked in grime. Most generals would just order a quick hose down, but not Patton. Oh no, laugh. So Unka, he decides that tanks need a spade complete with perfume.
Yep, you read that, right?
It all started when Patton inspected a particularly filthy tank. He stuck his head inside, took one whiff, and recoiled gips-like. "This thing smells like a combination of sweaty socks and dead fish, tia," like he exclaimed. "Laugh, though live. We're gonna ride into battle. Our tanks should at least smell presentable." So Bild's poor aide, standing nearby, opened his mouth to suggest soap and water, but Patton was already off and running. "Media, find me the finest cologne you can," Solian Patton ordered. "Guy the kind that makes ladies swoon in Germans. Well, maybe just makes them confused." Guy the soldiers were convinced he was joking, but when crates of cheap perfume arrived at the base, they realized he was dead serious. Running laugh. "So sir, are we just going to spray this on the tanks?" Guy one private asked, holding a bottle of something called Daily Desert Bloom. "Clicking, right? Like we are," Guy Patton declared, grabbing a bottle and dousing the nearest tank. Laugh. The scent of overly sweet flowers, just mixed with diesel fumes, filled the air. "Dien, now, doesn't that smell better?" Guy asked, beaming. The soldiers, trying not to laugh, nodded and started spraying. Some got creative, mixing different scents to see if they could make like a tank smell like a rose garden or like a cheap cologne counter. The results were ... interesting ... tanks that had been caked in dirt now glistened with this strange perfume when the wind blew. Clouds of floral scents wafted across the base, confusing both soldiers and local wildlife. A flock of birds even landed on one particularly fragrant tank, as if it were just like a giant flower. But Patton wasn't done twice. "If we're going to smell so good, Linden, laugh," he announced daily. "Like we might as well look good too." He ordered the soldiers to polish every bit of metal until it shone. Tanks that had once been drab and battle-worn now looked like they were ready for a car show. One sergeant polishing a turret muttered, "Wait, laugh, I never thought I'd be giving a tank like a beauty treatment. When higher-ups heard about their perfume parade, they were less than thrilled. Patton, Blitz. This is a military operation, not a beauty pageant, so won general complaint. But Patton had a response ready. Daily, a clean, good-smelling tank is a happy tank, and happy tanks fight better. Daily, and you know what? The soldiers actually loved it. It gave them a break from the grind, and the ridiculousness of spraying perfume on tanks made them laugh, just boosting morale in a way like no formal speech ever could. So, as you drift off, imagine a desert landscape filled with rumbling tanks, each one shimmering in the sun and smelling like a combination of roses and motor oil. Only Patton could turn a routine cleaning into a full-blown sensory experience. Brace yourselves for their use rescue Blitz. Let's list the time Patton pulled off a rescue mission so bold it made even his own commanders choke on their coffee. Picture this: Allied forces are trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded by German troops, and the brass is debating the sensible way to rescue them, so Patton, meanwhile, is just itching to hit the gas. The call comes in. A division of American soldiers is surrounded near a town called Bastogne. The plan from headquarters, a slow, methodical advance. So careful not to risk too much. Patton takes one look at the map and snorts. Methodical. That's just a fancy word for slow. Daily, like he barks. Daily, like I'll get there faster by driving through the enemy's lunch break. Daily. So his idea, take his tank division and charge straight through German held territory covering 200 miles in record time. His staff tries to argue, sir, that's suicide. We'll be flanked outnumbered. So Unki cuts them off. Egonti just don't care if we're outnumbered by tanks and elephants. Those boys are waiting for us, and I'm not gonna let them down because some pencil pusher thinks it's too risky. And so the mad dash begins. Patton's tanks roar off, leaving a trail of dust so big it's visible from space. They ignore supply lines, skip rest breaks, and even just drive through the night with headlights off, just relying on the moonlight and sheer guts. At one point, they hit a roadblock just like uncut, so Patton orders the tanks to drive right through a farmer's field, flattening crops and startling cows. Daily, sorry farmer. Daily, he yells out the tank hatch. Daily, consider it a contribution to the war effort. German forces are caught completely off guard. They expect a gradual advance, but instead, Patton's tanks come crashing through like a bull in a china shop. There's a famous story about a German officer who was eating breakfast when he heard the roar of engine. He steps outside, sees Patton's tanks charging toward his position, and reportedly says daily, well, that's not supposed to happen, before dropping his coffee and running for cover. The rescue isn't without drama. At one point, Patton's lead tanks run low on fuel. Daily, no problem. Daily, he says, and orders the troops to siphon fuel from any available vehicle. Including jeeps and even a few captured German trucks. Soldiers are lying on the ground, sucking on fuel hoses, while Patton paces nearby shouting, Daily, hurry up, those boys are just waiting. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Patton's tanks roll into the besieged area. The trapped soldiers, exhausted and low on ammo, can't really believe their eyes. One private later said daily, we heard the tanks and thought it was the Germans coming to finish us off. Then we saw the stars and stripes and someone yelled, oh, it's Patton's laugh. Uncut, and we all started crying like babies. U.S. South. Patton climbs out of his tank, surveys the scene, and grins. Save told you we'd make it. Nancy laughed. He says, as if he'd just taken a Sunday drive. The rescue mission becomes a legend, and Patton Siertinik, like blitzkriegish tactics, save thousands of lives. Sure, he gets an earful from headquarters about Nini disregarding orders daily, but Patton just shrugs. Daily laughs sometimes, Daily. He says daily, like you've got to break a few rules to do the right thing. Daily. So as you drift off, imagine the thunder of tanks in the night, the relief on the faces of trapped soldiers, and Peyton's just wild laugh echoing across the battlefield. Laugh, sort of like, because when it comes to spin his men, speed is the only strategy that matters. All right, let's talk about Patton's post-Warticle slackening scandal T. Laugh like so, like onto, because even tank generals need a break, right? Picture this, World War II is over. Patton's a hero, but instead of relaxing on a beach, he's just plowing a field with a tank.
Yep.
You read that, right? The man who conquered battlefields decided to try his hand at agriculture, and chaos ensued. After the war, Patton found himself bored out of his mind. Daily peace is for cowards. Daily, he grumbled to anyone who'd listen. Daily, like I need something to do, or I'll go stir crazy. Daily, laugh. So when he was assigned to a post in the countryside, he looked at the vast fields and thought, years, hey, my tanks are pretty good at moving dirts. So sort of like uncut, maybe they can help plant crops daily. His first experiment, hitching a tank to a plow. The mechanics tried to warn him, Starcert tanks are just for battle, not farming. The tracks will tear up the soil. Chair. And Patton waved them off. I go, nonsense. These tanks can do anything. Daily, he climbed into the tank, revved the engine, and took off across the field. The result, a path of torn up earth, so jagged, so it looked like a giant mole had gone berserk. Laugh. The local farmers, watching from a distance, shook their heads in just disbelief. But Patton didn't give up. Laugh. Next, he decided to use tanks to transport hay. He ordered soldiers to stack bales of hay on top of a tank, reasoning when like it's like carrying ammunition, just like Fluffy. Ago, the problem, every time the tank moved, the hay shifted and bales went flying in all directions. One private was nearly knocked over by a rogue hay bale, and Patton just laughed. Sin, laugh. See, that's why we need to practice. So can't have hay ambushing like us. Final straw came when Patton decided tonic basically improve that truths. He ordered his tanks to drive back and forth over a dirt road, thinking the tracks would actually compact the soil. Instead, they turned the road into a rutted mess so deep that civilian cars got stuck in the grooves. Laugh. The townspeople started calling it Polno and Patton's Folly area, and complaints poured into headquarters. Xiao died the general in charge balked over the phone. Gates, what in blazes are you doing with those tanks? I've got farmers and shopkeepers complaining that you're destroying their town. You Patton, munching on an apple he'd cook borrowed twice from a nearby orchard, replied, Dan, sir, laugh. I'm just trying to help. Farming is like warfare, except the enemy is just weeds and bad soil. But the brass wasn't amused. They just ordered him to stop using tanks for farming immediately. Laugh. Patton, sulking, switched to using jeeps instead, much to the relief of the local. But the damage was done. Laugh. So basically, uncoach jeans tank farming, sexquatusti, just a running joke in the military, and every time someone suggested an odd use for equipment, they'd say, K, don't let Patton hear about this, or he'll be plowing fields with submarines next day. So as you drift off, just imagine George Patton, war hero, tooling around a farm in his tank, laugh singing off key military songs while accidentally uprooting half the crops. Even in peace, the man couldn't help but cause a little chaos. All right, hold on to your seatbelts, Vertical Racing Aftermath, Guy Love like Unku. The post-war chapter, where Patton took his need for speed from the battlefield to, well, the civilian street. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for his driver's license. Picture this decorated general in a flashy sports car, zooming down country roads like he's still chasing Rommel, except not theft dress enemy Tor. Laugh is like speed limits and annoyed like traffic cop. After the war, Patton traded in his tank for a sleek fast sports car. Laugh. So probably something with enough horsepower to make his old tank engines jealous. He'd cruise around the countryside, top down, wind in his hair, or what was left of it, and a grin on his face that screamed, "Drone, I dare you to catch me," area, and catch him. They did, just not in the way he wanted. One day, Patton was just tearing down a quiet country road, enjoying the feel of the wind and the roar of the engine. He was so lost in the moment that he didn't notice the speed limit sign until a police car with flashing lights popped out of nowhere. Daily, oh bother, Daily Patton probably muttered, pulling over. The whole traffic cop, not recognizing the whole general in his civilian clothes, walked up to the car. Tidy laugh. "So she haven't any idea how fast you were going, Gwen?" he asked. Pat never one to back down, replied, "Seeing of course I do so. Fast enough to make sure I don't miss lunch." Download the cop, unamused, asked for his license and registration. When he saw the name seemed George S. Pat 9 on the license, his eyes went wide. Lean eyes like, "Wait, you're General Patton," laughed Patton, thinking he'd probably get a free pass, smiled, and said, "Daily, the one and only." Daily. But the cop didn't really care about war heroes. House laughed, "So care. Well, General Singh," he said, writing out the ticket. "Daily, even heroes have to follow the speed limit." Laugh so line. "I floored get in fast, Tony, for going so fast in my own car, gay," he grumbled the whole time. The cop wrote the ticket, and when he was done, Patton snatched it and drove off, muttering about Nick overzealous law enforcement. But that wasn't the only time. There are stories of Patton getting pulled over multiple times, so each time arguing with the cops about the importance of speed call, holding one's reflexes so sharp. So one time he even tried to convince a cop that his speeding was a form of daily post, like war training build, but the cop just rolled his eyes and handed him another ticket. His friends and family started to worry. Daily, like, "George, you're gonna get yourself killed or thrown in jail." His wife be scolded. Patton just laughed. "Daily, where's the fun in driving so slow? Life's too short to putt along like an old lady with a walker." Daily. The core racing aftermath guide just affect his driving record. It also gave the press a field day. Newspapers ran stories about some general's speed demon. Daily, his need for speed, turning him into a bit of a celebrity for his wild driving habits. So as you drift off, imagine Patton in his flashy sports car, zooming down the road, wind in his hair, and just a stack of speeding tickets in the glove compartment. Laugh, sort of like Uncut, because even in peacetime, the man couldn't resist the urge to go fast. All right, let's dive into the Cure Toy Tank Revenge Daily. Laugh, Uncut, the chapter where Patton in his later years proved that you're never too old to play with tanks, even if they're tiny. Picture like this, a retired General Patton sitting in his living room, surrounded by model tanks, plotting miniature invasions like a kid on a sugar high. After retiring from the military, Patton found himself with a lot of free time. Daily. What's a guy supposed to do when he's not commanding armies, guy? He grumbled. Then one day, his grandson brought over a set of toy tanks. Patton's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas. Laugh guy. Just like the perfect way to relive my glory days. Just like sort of like Uncle, only smaller and less likely to get me yelled at by generals. Davin. He started by setting up elaborate battle scenes on his dining room table. Tiny plastic soldiers marched across tablecloths, while miniature tanks rumbled over salt shakers and napkin holders. Twice, "Now listen here," laughed little fellas. Daily, he'd say to the toys, like, "We're gonna reenact the Battle of the Bulge, but this time, yeah, we're gonna do it right." Daily. His poor wife, Bee, would walk into the room to find the table covered in tiny tanks and plastic soldiers, with Patton hunched over, just moving them around and making peach. Puby sound. "Focus. Are you playing with toys again?" Gesseed asked, trying not to laugh. Gets to laugh playing. "Nonsense," Gesseed plied. Daily. "Like I'm just conducting important military research. These miniature models help me understand tactical flaws in a low-stakes environment." daily. But it wasn't all serious. Peyton loved to challenge his grandchildren to miniature tank battles. Phone lent, alright, you little rascals, mean, he'd say, handing them toy tanks. Laugh. So, let's see if you can just outmaneuver me. But be warned, laugh, Unca, I've been doing this for real daily. Like the kids would giggle as Patton moved his tanks around the floor, shouting orders and pretending to be under attack. One time he invited some of his old military buddies over for a strategy session. Give arrived expecting serious talk only to find Patton sitting on the floor with like a giant model tank set. Gentlemen, gang as bunkers, again tens as bunkers, mutually confused, eventually joined in, just laughing as they moved toy tanks and download blew up from cookie tins with marshmallows. Patton even started writing daily after action reports, on his toy tank battles. Guy the miniature panzer division showed surprising resilience daily. He'd note daily, but our Sherman tanks prevailed due to superior maneuverability, and because I knocked over their command post, laugh with a coffee cup. Some people thought it was odd for a war hero to be playing with toys, but Patton didn't care. Twice war is serious business, twice laugh, he said daily, but that doesn't mean we can't have a little fun while we're at it. Plus, these toy tanks don't talk back or need their engines fixed, they're perfect. Laugh. So as you drift off, just imagine General George Patton surrounded by tiny toy tanks, laughing and strategizing like it's 1944 all over again, just on proof that even the toughest soldiers have a soft spot for a little childlike fun.
All right, let's tackle Detty rumor, crusher laugh, Anka, early and just kind of like chapter where Patton tried to set the record straight but ended up uncovering even wilder stories. Picture this, a grumpy retired Patton sitting in front of a microphone ready to debunk the craziest rumors about his tank. Driving days, spoiler alert, he probably made them worse.
The rumor mill had been churning since Patton became famous. People claimed he'd driven a tank through a Paris cafe, used tanks to plow through wine cellars, so even that, he kept a pet tiger in his tank. Ton finally said, daily, I may be a lot of things, but I'm not a tank driving lunatic. Well, not all the time. First up, the gray tank through the cafe. You story, you complete. Rubbish guy, Patton barked into the mic. I would never drive a tank through a cafe. Laugh like Unca restaurants are for eating, not for tank parades. Now, maybe a bakery, maybe, but only if they had fresh croissants. The audience chuckled and Patton grinned. Next rumor, using tanks to steal wine. Look, daily, Patton said, daily, when we liberated those French vineyards. The wine was just there. Would you leave perfectly good wine sitting around during a war? I think not. We were doing a public service, laugh, just keeping the wine from falling into enemy hands. Says the crowd laughed and Patton winked. Says, ago, had a little fun too. But then someone asked about the pet tiger. Patton threw back his head and laughed. Twice a tiger in my tank. That's the best one yet. So I had enough trouble keeping my soldiers in line. Laugh imagine a tiger. No, the closest I had to a pet was a stray dog that followed us for a few days. We named him Panzer, which was probably a mistake because he kept trying to chew on the tank tracks, but as he tried to debunk rumors, Patton accidentally let slip some real life craziness. When laugh people say, I made soldiers polish tanks with champagne guy. He said daily, that's not true. We used actual glass cleaner. Champagne is for drinking, not for cleaning. Daily. Wait, so the champagne was real? The audience just perked up. He also admitted to once painting a tank bright pink as a prank on a rival division. Equal laugh. They thought we were surrendering. Guy, he cackled daily. But no, Uncle, we just wanted to see the look on their faces. So let's just say pink is not a good color for camouflage. By the end of the session, instead of squashing rumors, Patton had confirmed some and added even more. Laugh. The press loved it, calling him daily, like the general who tells it just like it is, even if it's more ridiculous than the rumors. Daily. So as you drift off, imagine Peyton surrounded by microphones, laughing and spinning tales, laugh uncut, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and a little bit of rumor is just part of being like a legendary tank commander. Finally, let's wrap things up with Guy the Steel Legend Never Dies, Guy Uncut, the chapter where we see how Patton's tank legacy lives on. Picture this modern-day tanks rolling across battlefields, their commanders shouting orders, and in the back of their minds, a little voice that sounds suspiciously like Patton laugh, yelling, "Starve faster, faster, send." Patton may be gone, but his love for tanks and his wild-haired strategies changed warfare forever today. Laugh when military schools teach about armored warfare. They don't just talk about tactics like Unke, they talk about Patton's philosophy, speed, surprise, and a healthy dose of daily don't always be afraid to be a little crazy. Tank crews around the world still tell stories about Patton's antics daily. Remember when he made his soldiers spray perfume on tanks? Daily, one might say, laughing. Daily, or when he got lost in the desert and came back with a better strategy. Daily, another might add. These stories aren't just for laughs, so Unka, they're reminders that sometimes thinking outside the box or like the tank can lead to victory. Modern tanks are faster, stronger, and probably more advanced than anything Patton probably could have imagined, but they still carry a bit of his spirit. When a tank commander takes a bold risk, when a crew pushes their machine to the limit, they're channeling that Patton energy, sort of like Unka, the same energy that made a kid with toy tanks into a legend. Even in pop culture, Patton's legacy lives on. Movies and books depict him as the ultimate tank general, complete with his trademark growl and love for speed. Kids who play with toy tanks today might not know it, but they're actually carrying on a tradition that started with a young George Patton and his miniature metal army. So as you drift off to sleep, think about the thunder of tank tracks echoing through history, from Patton's early days with toy tanks, to the massive machines of today. His legends may be made of steel, but it's his spirit, sort of like his love for what he did, his willingness to be different, and his never-ending need to go fast, unto that truly lives on. The man who turned tanks into symbols of speed and power may be gone, but the steel legend never really died. Now, as the story fades into the quiet of the night, imagine those tank tracks slowly fading into the distance. The rumble softens to a whisper. The desert sand settles, and even Patton's booming voice turns into a gentle murmur. Maybe he's just off somewhere, just chasing a new horizon with a toy tank in hand, still dreaming up wild strategies that make the stars twinkle like artillery fire. Close your eyes and let the weight of the day melt away, just like the armor of those tanks melting into the moonlight. There's no rush here, just Dunka, no need to charge into battle or race against time, just the peaceful rhythm of a story well told, just wrapping around you like a warm blanket. So rest easy, dreamer. The tanks have just rolled off into the night, and their legend is safe in the quiet of your mind. Oh, good night, and may your dreams be as bold and wild as Patton's tank adventure.